So we went over to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the release of our fathers from prison camp. So that's cool, Tracy, that we're twinning tonight. So anyway, I'm a big rock and roll fan, as most of you that know me know. And there was a song that came out almost 20 years ago by a band called Kansas, that you would all know Kansas from songs like Dust in the Wind and Carry On Wayward Son. And it's a song they did on an album called Somewhere to Nowhere. And it was written by their chief songwriter, Kerry Livgren, who wrote many, many of their songs. Thanks for coming, Brad Fuller. And I'd like to read you these lyrics. I played the song twice today. It always touches my heart. And even though the lyrics are very poetic, if you get a chance to listen to the song, it's done in the progressive rock style. So if you're a fan of those type of groups, I think you would like it. Kind of hard rock, but well done, well executed. And I believe, I've never been able to confirm this, but I believe it's the story of Kerry Livgren's father, who was either a flyer or flying in either a B-17, B-24, like that, in World War II. So I'm going to start by reading these lyrics. And these lyrics hit home with me because I just feel like it's almost autobiographical about my dad. But of course, it's about tens of thousands of American airmen in World War II. In the darkness I rise, long before the dawn. I was dreaming of home and the life I led. I can hear the sound of the engine's roar, and I crave the embrace of my empty bed, where I'm safe. But the call is clear, and the task is set, and my enemies wait in the dark sky. Do they fear the same fear? Do they dream like us? Do they long for the day when it's over and they're safe? We're cruising above the horizon, never knowing if we will return. In a moment we'll loose the destruction and will justify all that we burn. Here the air is cold, but my thoughts are clear, and I'm wondering why I must be here. For the evil that can come from the heart of a man must be answered in kind till it disappears, and we're safe. Now we're cruising above the horizon, never knowing if we will return. In a moment we'll rain down destruction, and will justify all that we burn. And then there's a musical break there, and it changes slightly. The tempo changes. Dodging all the tracers, sky is full of lead. I can see the pilots' faces. Safety in our numbers, eagles overhead. We are in the sight of aces, fighter planes. Flak bursting all around. Friends going down in flames. Now we're hit. It's happened. This is what I feared. Something's telling me my time has come. Though it should be panic, I can feel a peace. Strangely now I know my purpose. Hey boys, get out while you can. I'll try to take us home. I'm going home. When you hear it in the context of the song, it's very, very dynamic. So that's Kansas, and it's Icarus 2, if you want to look it up or do Pandora on it or something. And it's from the album Somewhere to Elsewhere from about the year 2000. Okay, I want to read you a letter, a little part of a letter. I just caught this today, and I don't remember if this is the one I held up the other night, but I didn't read it. But this letter, and again, I know everything's in reverse, this letter is dated September 3rd, 1943. And the postmark down there, my brother put it in the scrapbook, he says, look at the postmark. September 6, 1943. That's the day Dad was shot down. So he wrote this 3 days before, and he wrote it immediately after a mission. He wrote it immediately after the September 3rd, 1943 mission to Moulin, France, which was, according to Dad's list, his 8th flight. According to me, it's his 9th, might be his 9th flight. And again, September 3rd, 1943, and they blew up the airfields in Moulin, probably because that's where the fighter jets were flying out of. So let me read you just a little piece of this letter, and it's written to his sister Lucille and his brother-in-law Joe Clance, and Joe's son Joe Clance was Merle Clance, who was the science teacher for many years at Newcomerstown High School, and he's my first cousin, and his wife Kathy was my administrative assistant for many years. Anyway, Dad's writing to Joe and Lucille, and he said, I took another trip today. I would like to see Joe up there flying with me. He likes to fly so well, but I think after about one trip, he would like it better on the ground. The ground is the safest place, but I love to get into the air where the action is. That was written 3 days before he was shot down. I love to get into the air where the action is. Wow. To be young and invincible. So that's where we're going to pick up. And if you recall, I'll just read you the last paragraph of where we were 2 nights ago. And where we were 2 nights ago, Dad had just been shot down. And he had just landed in a French vineyard not far from a Frenchman's house. And I'll read that last paragraph to catch us up. Eventually, I managed to rise to my feet long enough to pull the chute off my chest. I sat down between the vines as my foot began to swell. I had flight boots on, so the ankle could continue to swell, and I would still be able to keep them on. A Frenchman ran out to me, motioning for me to come into his house. It hurt too much to walk, so I tried crawling for a distance, but I could not make it. I knew that if the man were caught helping me, he would be shot, so I motioned for him to leave. I spent that night in the vineyard. So that's where we left off. Hi, Mary. Hi, Richard. And welcome anybody else I missed. I think I saw Cousin Greg on there. The next morning, the Frenchman returned with some bread and wine for me. I had seen no other American in that area the whole time I laid there, but around noon, I saw a German guard across the field with his gun drawn. I tried to hide, but he immediately ordered me to come out of the vines, his gun aimed toward me. I deliberated a while, wondering what I should do, but I decided I should go with him, my hands in the air. I crawled out, and he motioned for me to stand. I stumbled up, and he got behind me and ordered me the direction to go. And of course, keep in mind, most of these young soldiers had no German. The only person that could speak any foreign language in the group was the pilot, Lieutenant Cunningham. He says, I heard trucks moving about a half a mile away, and I stumbled and moved the best I could to get to the road with a bayonet to my rear the whole time. When we reached the road, he waved the first truck down, and we got on. As we went down the road, we passed 4 crashed B-17s and 2 Focke-Wulfs. The Germans swore as we passed each one. I knew it had been a hard fight, but until then, I didn't realize how hard. I would later find out that the entire 563rd Squadron of 6 planes had been wiped out that day. Of the 21 planes on the Stuttgart raid, only 10 limped back to base. The losses that day were the greatest that the 388th bomb group, that bomb group that Dad was in, encountered throughout the entire war. Let me reach down here because I didn't show you this the other night. And I can show you, this was the head-on view of the Stuttgart raid, and I'm just going to show you, that's the 388th. All those planes make up the 388th, and I think if you count them, there's 21 planes in there. And how many did Dad say were shot down? 11. 10 went back to base. So where you see the dark oval circles, You count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So where the 11 dark circles are, those were the planes that were shot down. The other planes made it back, although this one, again, I know it's in reverse, this one says pilot killed. So I assume the pilot was shot, probably by a German fighter. The bullet probably went into right where he was, and evidently the co-pilot brought that plane back. That would be the only answer. Over here, where the dark circle is, that's Dad's plane. So you can see, of the 21 planes there, 11 were shot down, and I think this whole squadron right in here is the 563rd. There were 6 planes in the 563rd Squadron, and so his entire squadron was shot down that day, and his plane is on here, and believe it or not, what they called that spot in the raid, or any raid, that's called Coffin Corner. So that's where that's at. So that gives you an idea of the positioning of the planes, but also of how many of the 21 planes that went on that Stuttgart raid, 11 were shot down. Okay, so let me pick back up. September 6, 1943, forever became known as Black Monday in military terms. If you read that term, you'll see it as Black Monday for World War II. We lost 11 planes that day, and of the 108 men on board those 11 planes, so theoretically there should have been 110 men, so I don't know why there was only 108. So a couple planes must have been 1 man short. 4 escaped capture, and by the way, including Lieutenant Cunningham, which is a different story. 9 were interred in Switzerland, which means they either bailed out or they crash landed in Switzerland, and they locked them up. They were a neutral country, but they didn't just let them run around. They locked them up. 12 were missing in action. 27 were KIA, killed in action, and 56 were POWs. So of those 108 men on board for the 563rd Squadron Dad was a part of, 56 were POWs, 27 were killed, and then I say 12 MIA, 9 in Switzerland, and 4 escaped. Okay? We came to the small town of Troyes, France, and went to a jail, which the Germans took him to, where he met up in a small town jail, in a small town in France. I met up with my co-pilot, navigator, and 4 other members of my crew, plus about 15 to 20 other American airmen. So if we count Dad, plus co-pilot 2, navigator 3, and 4 other members, that's 7. So 7 of the 10 members of his crew are all rounded up, and they're in this little jail in Troyes. It's Troyes, and it's, I don't know how far east, but it is east of Paris, okay? Welcome, Jacqueline. Welcome, April. I think I saw Heidi up there. Welcome, Heidi. Okay. Couple days later, on September 8th or 9th, he's not sure, we were taken from the small jail to the train station. We did not know what to expect, as we could not understand the guards. At the train station, the French smiled at us because they knew we were Americans, but they had to be careful. The guards would move them on as we passed. The Germans had 1 guard for every 2 American airmen. So you think they want them to get away? 1 guard for every 2 prisoners? We could tell we had reached Germany by the people in the train station. At one stop, we were ordered off and met up with more troops. As we walked through the station, people would scream at us and call us American gangsters. Tracy might know the word for this, and if she prints it up there on the screen, I'll try to pronounce the German word. I tried to Google it. I could not find it. I found a lot of rap stars, but if you type in American gangsters, World War II slang, and I believe that the reason they referred to these American airmen as American gangsters is that there was a lot of propaganda going around that the American airmen and many of the American soldiers were people either released from insane asylums or prisons. That was part of the propaganda in Germany, that the people that were raining down these bombs on them were American gangsters, but again, I don't know the German term for that. Because they knew we were the men that had been bombing them. Of course, they were bombing their industrial plants, their airfields, etc. We had to walk several miles from the station. My foot still bothered me, but I made up my mind to go because I had no idea what they would do to me if I couldn't go. It was warm when we reached Dahl Loft, and I tried again to confirm where that is, and I knew at one time, I can't find it in my information, but this is a location where they stopped at. We sat down in the yard and heard an American yelling, "Smoke your cigarettes!" We learned this was because the Germans would take all your cigarettes, probably because they wanted to smoke them themselves, and they loved American cigarettes in Germany. A German captain came up to me and wanted to see my foot, which by this time was badly swollen. He ordered another wounded prisoner and me to go with a guard. This was the last time I would ever see my officers, although I would see a sergeant again. The two of us were taken to a very nice building which was being used as a hospital. I was taken in and assigned a room, and this blows my mind, where I could take a shower or bath. Isn't that shocking in wartime? I was taken in and assigned a room. I said that. I later learned that at the same time, the other men were taken into the prison and really worked over to get any information. Hi, Ryan. Hi, Joyce. Higher-ranking officers were treated even more severely because they knew more than the enlisted men. There were 2 British non-commissioned officers who acted as orderlies in the hospital and brought me my food tray for the day. Sounds kind of like a normal hospital, doesn't it? But remember, you're in Germany. Hi, Polly. Thanks for coming. The 3rd day I was there, a guard came to my door, took me to another room, and ordered me to sit down. According to Google Translator, American gangster, according to Google Translate from my sister-in-law. So American gangster terminology. I probably sat there for an hour by myself in a windowless room. A captain came in, and I stood and saluted him. He returned the salute, and we sat at a table across from one another. He asked me my name, where I had come from, and many other questions. All I would tell him was my name, rank, and serial number, just as we had been instructed. Hi, Bruce Burdall. Thanks for being on, and thanks for all you're doing. He then put before me a list of the crew of the airplane. He told me they had everyone but Lieutenant Cunningham and Sergeant Land. Now, if you remember what I said a couple nights ago, Sergeant Land went AWOL. He said, I'm not going back up. So Sergeant Land, that was an old crew list, but somehow they got a crew list from the Cunningham crew as well as all these other crews. And the German captain threatened not to fix my foot to try to get more information, but I still refused. And then this is one of my favorite parts. If you can laugh about anything like this, if you know my dad, it's a pretty funny joke. The German captain would blow smoke in my face and leave his cigarette in front of me to try to get me to talk more. But the smoke didn't entice me because I didn't smoke. So to a smoker, wow, if you're going to give me a cigarette, yeah, I'll talk. But to Dad, no big deal. It's just kind of annoying. Finally, the German captain left the room, and after I sat there for about 15 more minutes, one of the English corporals came and took me to the main part of the hospital. The English corporal was the first person I had met since my capture that I could actually talk to. Soon after that, I got a very good meal. The next day, they took several of us out, and they took x-rays of my foot. A few days later, they told me that my foot was not broken, and I had just badly twisted it. 57 years later, it still bothers me. So if you do some quick math on that from 1943 to 57, it looks like Dad initially wrote this in about the year 2000, and my daughter graduated high school in 99, so that sounds pretty close. The hospital was pleasant, and I played bridge with the 2 British corporals who were much better at the game than I. About 10 days later, the Germans decided I was able to move around well enough to be moved to a regular prison camp. So I think this is the cushy part of the trip, being in this hospital, and British officers who, of course, were prisoners being used as orderlies. So it doesn't sound like he had it too bad there. But, of course, we know it gets worse. I was in a group of about 40 enlisted men who were transported back to the train station. Now we go to Munich to Stalag XVIIa, which had less than desirable condition and housed men of many nationalities. And I'm going to stop there just a second. And I'm going to dig out this map. And again, I apologize for the reverse. If you do video on Facebook, it converts it. But if you do Facebook, or not in Facebook, just on your iPhone, it converts it. But if you do it on Facebook Live, it does not. Here is Troyes, France to Moosburg, which is where Stalag XVIIa is. And so I want to show you that map. So that's the distance from one to the other. And it's 463 miles from where his plane crashed, and they took him to the town jail, and he eventually ends up at Stalag XVIIa, which is in Moosburg, Germany. And as you can see there, it's just north of Munich. And ironically, Stuttgart is about halfway in between, and of course that's where they bombed the day they were shot down. And of course, if you see the distance between Stuttgart and Troyes, that's how far they got after the Stuttgart raid before they got shot down, because Troyes, France is where, of course, they were shot down. So anyway, there we are. And hi, Sandy, and hi, Ivy. Thanks for being on here. Okay, so that just gives you kind of a relative idea on the map. Let's see. Okay, we went to Munich to 7A, Stalag XVIIa, which had less than a desirable condition and housed men of many nationalities, including American, French, English, Russian, and Australian. We slept on the floor or wherever we could find space. While there, I ran into a few other men from my crew. The French and English controlled the camp because some of them had been there 3 or 4 years. Read that again. Some of the French and English had been there 3 or 4 years. The only things we received there were a blanket and a pair of shoes. In early October 43, so he shot down September 6th, so now we're early October 43, so about a month, they moved me along with 15 other American prisoners to a new camp. We put all of our supplies in our blankets and set off on foot to the train station. However, this time we did not go to the train station, but to the train yards, where we were on freight cars known as a 40 or 8, which means they were to carry 40 men or 8 horses. The box cars were not even the size of a typical American freight car, but they were actually about the size of a caboose. And I want to show you what a 40 or 8 train car looks like. And if I can find my dad's pin, I think he was a member of what was called the 40 or 8 Society. And to get in there, you had to show proof that you had ridden in a 40 or 8 freight car. These were the same freight cars all across France and all across Europe at the time that transported the Jews and the other ethnic groups to the concentration camps. Okay, so here's a photo, and it's a really nice photo, and I'll tell you a little bit about this particular 40 or 8 as you can see it there. Okay, that particular 40 or 8 was completely restored and now resides at the United States Air Force Museum on the Wright-Patt Air Force Base. So if you've gone up there, and I haven't made it yet to see the Memphis Belle, but I'll be back someday to see the Memphis Belle, I'm sure that the 40 or 8 train car is relatively close to the Belle just simply because they're both vintage World War II, and I'm sure they're probably in that same section. That train was dedicated, I think, in 2003. No, 2002. And the reason I know that is I'm looking at the back of these photos, and we went to that dedication that day. I'm sorry the pictures aren't very good, but there's that 40 and 8 train car, and the reason those steps are there is because they invited any of the men that had been transported in a 40 or 8, excuse me, during World War II, to be there that day, to be the honored guests. And so Terry and I took Mom and Dad over, and there was a celebration of that 40 or 8 train car being dedicated. So we got a train car in an Air Force museum. So kind of will look out of place. You'll wonder, why is there a train car in the Air Force Museum? You can see Dad. Let's see. I'll put my finger on him. Most of you will recognize him there. I'm trying to get the glare off that photo. I'll post these on Facebook. But there he is, and all those gentlemen that are with him in 2003 are World War II survivors, and at some point in the war, they were on a 40 or 8, probably as a German prisoner. And then last but not least, there's a picture of Terry and I with Mom and Dad there at the train car. So that was about, I guess, 17 years ago, give or take. Okay, so let's see, where are we at? The guards told us we were going to a different POW camp. When we arrived, we were taken to a shelter where we put all of our supplies into a basket to be fumigated. The guards then took us to have our heads shaved and be sprayed for lice. When we were able to take a shower, we began to think they were taking us to a good camp. We waited in anticipation of what was to come, and about 3 hours later, they began calling our names and numbers and giving us our dirty clothes back. Now, that's where I have it set up to stop tonight. But what I would like to do is maybe move just a little bit ahead and do a little bit of the first half, shall we say, of the Krems camp, the camp in Austria where he spent the bulk of the remainder of the war. And so he was interred a total of about 20 months, and this is October of 43, and he remained there until April of 1945. So I think I'll go further with a little bit from Krems, if y'all don't mind, about 15 more minutes, and then we'll try to wrap up about 7:45, and then I think that'll get us ahead for Saturday night. And we won't have to do anything past Monday night, but it will take us to Monday night to finish. So we were then marched off in groups of 150 to our new home at Stalag XVIIb. I was assigned to barracks 36B. There's a picture of the camp, and again, because everything's backwards, you can't see it, but it's where that yellow mark, the larger yellow mark is. That was Dad's barracks, was 36B, and it was just simply 36A and 36B, and it was split in the middle for some reason. So they had a specific group of guys on each side. So 36A and 36B, but there was a wall in between that building. Since we had not gotten a good night's sleep in more than a week, we went instantly into our barracks. Now, supposedly this is a new camp. By the way, I want to mention something that Tracy and Terry and I were told, I believe, on our trip when we went to Krems, is when they brought that train in, they brought it in the dark of night, and they took these guys, they marched them several miles to the camp from the train station. And, and Tracy Jackson says her dad was in 18B. So they weren't far apart in the same camp, but it's neat that we have somebody on here whose father was also in the same camp as Dad. And, what I started to say was, so they took him there at night, and the reason they took him there at night, remember what we said earlier about American gangsters. They said if they took all 1,500 of these prisoners into that train station during the day that the folks there at the at Krems, they were afraid would kind of have a riot and they'd be fighting civilians off because civilians would be attacking the American prisoners of war. So they knew that it was just easier to take them in the middle of the night when everybody was already asleep, and then they wouldn't have a big crowd there waiting that the German soldiers then had to hassle with civilians on top of trying to deal with 1,500 American sergeants, which is basically what they all were because they were all enlisted men. We went instantly into our barracks, found our beds, and immediately went to sleep. I mean, they were just wasted. It was no more than 3 hours before men began to wake and yell because the bunks were full of fleas. Now, they were told they were going to a new camp. In truth, this camp had been used to house a number of other Allied soldiers, and within a day prior to them coming, they moved several thousand Russians out of this camp and put the Americans in. I have a picture of what a mattress looks like in a prison camp, and that's what the mattress looked like right there. It's kind of like a burlap type sack with straw or anything that you could put in it to make it soft enough to lay on. But that would be a typical mattress for a prisoner of war. And one of my college professors, Ron Bolander, is on here. Hi, Ron, and a good friend. Okay, so how did they solve that? He said, we all had to get up, take our bunks apart, and run fire across the wood to kill the fleas. Now, don't ask me how they were allowed to have fire. I'm not quite sure, but somehow they took the bunks outside and, put a torch on them or whatever they could get a hold of to kill the fleas. That's how bad it was. Here is a photo of the actual camp. And this is one of the main gates for it. And I'll show you this photo. Now, Dad didn't take this photo. I've got this photo out of other publications, but that is Stalag XVII right there, one of the gates leading into it. Now we talk about food for a minute. The next day, we received soup and rutabagas, which my dad, the rest of his life, and Terry can confirm this, called them rutabagas. Rutabagas. He kind of put a Y on it, which was the first hot food we had eaten in weeks. We were so hungry that it didn't really bother us, and I hope no one has a weak stomach, that the soup had worms in it. A few days later, we received Red Cross parcels, one for every 2 men, even though there was supposed to be 1 per man per week. The parcel was good. It contained a can of Spam, a can of corned beef, a can of crackers, and keep in mind it had to be sealed in a can, with the moisture, and it's traveling from, the United States most likely, 2 ounces of instant coffee, a can of skim milk, I think he means condensed milk, a half a pound of cheese, also in a tin, just like the cracker, the little thing like on the can of Spam you had to take off, 2 packs of cigarettes, a box of raisins or prunes, and a chocolate bar called a Square D. And sometimes you see that as a D bar, and it had some protein in it. It had some sustenance in it. It wasn't like a candy bar like a Snickers. It would be something more that would have a protein base in it that you could eat and get some nutrition out of. So that was typical, and I've got a photo in here from February 1942 of one that's very similar to that one. It's not a whole lot different from the package Dad had. And here's a photo of another Red Cross parcel, and I'm sure that they varied the contents from time to time. But again, sorry about the reverse, but they had the same key ingredients: evaporated milk, hardtack, or a lunch biscuit they called it, cheese, instant cocoa, sardines, oleomargarine, corned beef, sweet chocolate, it says 2 5.5-ounce bars, granulated sugar, 2 ounces, powdered orange concentrate, 1 7-ounce package. I'm kind of thinking like the early version of Tang, maybe. And hi, Richard. Glad to see you on there. And let's see, the Tang, dehydrated soup, prunes, instant coffee, cigarettes, and this one even has some smoking tobacco on there. Tracy points out, and thanks for adding that, Tracy. Some of these are scrolling up so fast. I saw Rich did something, but they scroll up so fast I can't see them all. And Tracy, my friend, as I said, whose father was in there, mentions that when they gave you the Red Cross cans, and thanks for adding that, Tracy, because I knew that, but it wasn't in the book, the Germans poked holes in them. And you say, well, why would they poke holes in them? Because they didn't want men storing up food to hoard it, if you will, and then use it in an escape opportunity. So if they punched the corned beef, or they punched the milk, or they punched something else, obviously, unless it was extremely cold outside, you would have to use that up within a few days or it would go bad. So their idea was, if we're going to give it to them, they're going to consume it right now. They're not going to save a bunch of this stuff up so they can make an escaped attempt. And hi, Norma, thanks for coming. By the way, I will tell you that my father really didn't mind rutabagas the rest of his life. And a funny story, sometime around 2014, they asked him at the assisted living center that he and Mom were living at the time, it was his turn to have a special meal, and one of the items he asked for on the special meal was rutabagas. And I said, Dad, really? Because now everybody in the assisted living facility had to eat rutabagas. And he says, yeah, he says, I wanted everybody to have a prison meal. And I said, well, I think they'd have rather had surf and turf. Excuse me. Here was the interesting thing, and if you watch the movie Stalag XVII, which I mentioned on our first night, and here's the movie, if you weren't on any of my previous ones, excellent film by Billy Wilder, same guy did Some Like It Hot, and a number of other great Hollywood films. This one stars, excuse me, William Holden. William Holden won the Academy Award for that film. But one of the things that you see going on in the film is Holden, as his character Septon, is a master trader with the Germans. And he also says, what's the big deal? Everybody trades with the Germans. And so Dad traded with the Germans, or traded with other American GIs. And so what he said was, I received a pack of cigarettes a week. Well, if you think about it, it says 2 packs of cigarettes, but a lot of the time, the Red Cross parcels, as I mentioned before, were split in half, so you had to split them with another guy. So they'd give one package for 2 guys, and then you'd figure out what you wanted. Well, Dad would always take the cigarettes because he knew he could trade them, and he could get something really nice out of them. He could get another can of meat, or he could get some milk, or he could get some coffee, or, maybe a bar of soap someplace along the line. So he said, I could eat pretty well by trading the cigarettes to the Germans for food. Unfortunately, it was hard to trade for food all the time because we usually had to divide the parcel not only between 2 men, but sometimes up to 6 men. And he said that's when things really got tough. When you started going, that little list of food I showed you for 1 week was getting traded from 2 to 6 men. There's not much left. He says there were around 1,500 men when I first arrived. That was that whole train car. There was about 25 train cars, a 40 or 8s, with 60 men apiece on it. I do want to mention just briefly on that, and then I think that's a good place maybe to wrap up for tonight. Will keep us at about 45 minutes. And that is, he doesn't really say how tough it was in the train cars, but I've read some other accounts, and he did say at one point in time, that was the worst part of the war for me. It was tougher than the camp. And the train ride that he took, find my little map here, went from Moosburg, or Stalag 7A, to Krems, Austria, and the distance on that is 229 miles. And I also pointed out that when they were in Moosburg, Germany at Stalag XVIIa, they were a mere 30 miles from the Dachau concentration camp. And of course we know a lot of Jews died in that prison camp, along with Buchenwald and Auschwitz and several others. But certainly Dachau was one of the main ones. But anyway, that's the distance that they would have traveled. Now this is I did this on the internet. So basically that's a car route, and it says you can get there in 5 hours or whatever. But if I ask you guys all to guess, I don't think anybody would come up with the right number. But this was an 8-day train trip. Now I know that doesn't make any sense to me at all, but it was an 8-day train trip, and I assume there was maybe stopping and maybe pulling off on a side railing while another troop carrier or something with supplies passed. I don't know exactly why it took that long, but it did take that long. And so these men were shoved in that train car that I showed you. There were 60 American GIs in each one of those train cars. And remember what we called them? 40 or 8. 40 men, so 40 soldiers typically, like in World War I, 40 soldiers carrying troops, or 8 horses. But at this time there were 60 men put in there. And so all the things that you could think that would go on, needing to use the bathroom and etc. Yes, they had to designate a location or an area on each train car for that. Dad said that was the worst part of the war for him, and they couldn't wait to get off that train. Now, they weren't on the train all day, every day. They let them off for 15 or 20 minutes, fed them, and then threw them back on. So he says we did get out 2 or 3 times a day, but then once we got back in, you were stacked on top of each other. There was hardly any room to move, and we were all trying to figure out how to lay. And then, of course, how do you sleep? You can't sleep without, laying on somebody else. So I wanted to show you this, and if I had the actual ones here, I would certainly share them. But this is hanging on the wall in my mom's apartment at the assisted living in a frame with some of my dad's other mementos. And this is his actual POW dog tags. We do not have his American dog tags from the war, but we have his prisoner of war dog tags. And these were issued at Stalag, as you can see, 7A, and there's his prisoner number, 113521. And you were issued that when you first went into camp. I had one more picture here I wanted to show you. Let me look briefly for that. And when you were issued that, your photo was taken. And I don't know if Tracy has her father's POW photo. I do not, but I know at least one of the men on our trip to Austria 5 years ago, Mike Kessinger, had his father's POW photographs. And someday I hope to be able to find Dad's. I don't know exactly where to search for them, but they've got to be in an archive somewhere. But anyway, I want to show you what a typical prisoner of war, mugshots. And they took these photos of you when you were interred in the prison camp, and then they would have given you this dog tag with this number, because this number would match this photo. So this is a guy that I got off the internet, but this is a World War II prisoner of war, and you can see on there that it's got the name of the camp, his last name, and then a 6-digit number, which was his POW number. So someplace out there, there is a mugshot of my father from his interment at the first camp at 7A. And so once he had those dog tags, he didn't need another set at Stalag 17. And there probably were very few issued because all those guys had come from another camp. So anyway, we'll kind of leave you with that tonight. And thanks for popping on. And we're going to do this again Saturday night. And on Saturday night, we'll finish up all the things that went on inside the prison camp at Stalag 17. Ron popped on there and said he has seen it. And so, again, great film, well worth watching. It's actually considered a comedy, and I know you find that odd. But keep in mind, this is also the inspiration, and you know what it is because most of you are old enough to know, Hogan's Heroes, okay? So this is the inspiration for Hogan's Heroes. So it's a little bit funny in places. Robert Strauss is a great character actor. He's in it, and he's actually hilarious, but there's a dark side to it, and there's a real side to it, and I thought Billy Wilder and the actors did a great job. And my dad saw this movie a couple of times, and both times that he saw it, he said, you know, it's not a bad representation. He says, we weren't quite that funny, but, you know, we did have to laugh, and we did have to do a few goofy things to keep our sanity. So thanks, everybody, for joining me. We'll be back on here Saturday night at 7 p.m. And Tracy, in the meantime, if you find your dad's photo, I would love to, if you can email it to me, I would be glad to share it on here with the rest of the group. So thanks, everybody, for coming. We'll finish up. In the midst of everything that's going on, please stay safe. Please hunker down if that's what you're supposed to do. And to our first responders, our doctors, our nurses, our people in hospitals, you know, our STNAs, and you know, just everybody out there that's doing that, our pharmaceutical people, and our grocers, and all the other folks that are out there on the front line. Thank you for all that you do, and we'll get through this. And love y'all, and stay safe. Till next time. Bye-bye.